Welcome to this week's video briefing. I'm Graham Hutchings, Director of Analysis at Analytica, and our focus today is on Nigeria, where President Goodluck Jonathan sparked a severe crisis in his country by announcing on January the 1st the removal of fuel subsidies. Whatever the economic case, the political way in which that's been handled has been deeply troublesome. Over the last few days, the country has seen a general strike, added to which there has been the more long-standing problem of violence from the Boko Haram group and, I'm afraid, the ethnic stresses and strains in that large and complex country at the same time. I'm going to discuss some of the implications with my colleague Jason Mosley. And let's look first, Jason, at the route that Jonathan might be compelled to take or wish to take to extricate himself from this very difficult situation.
Sure. Thanks, Graham. The key thing to keep in mind is that during this crisis, Jonathan's administration has focused almost exclusively on the technicalities of the economic issue and tried to take a tough stance on those issues. Meanwhile, while he's been able to deploy people like the finance minister or the information minister to keep that message up, he's got quieter backdoor negotiations ongoing, most recently through the Senate president, who's a loyalist of the PDP, supported his bid for the presidency last year. And in the context of Nigerian politics, most likely there will be eventually some accommodation here. He's going to have to back down, is the bottom line.
He's going to lose political capital.
He's going to have to. He's already lost a lot of political capital. He came into the presidency having broken the ruling party's unofficial northern-southern rotational pact last year. So he's more dependent than other presidents in the past have been on popular legitimacy and having mishandled the way that he's introduced the removal of fuel subsidies, which will be removed eventually. He's now in a position where he's dented his capital already, and he needs to find a way to climb down without losing the overall battle on subsidies.
That's a question of timing, and that's a question of modality, and we see that happening rather than the complete disintegration of the country in some of the more alarmist scenarios that have been floated by some people.
Absolutely. I mean, the reason that those scenarios get floated and the reason that they get credibility and traction is because of the other crises that the country faces at the same time as the fuel subsidy. That was the sort of match to the dry kindling, but the pre-existing Boko Haram threat, the sectarian violence which has been flaring up more and more acutely over the last few years in areas of the Middle Belt, add up to a picture that makes the situation seem potentially more dire than it is.
Okay. Let's talk about the promise of Nigeria as well as the problems of Nigeria. Both are quite well known. What's not always so clear for observers, and indeed I think for market participants, is how those two relate, because we do have a very substantial economy here. We have a growth figure of coming in at about 6% or thereabouts last year, and until we had the disturbance of a few days ago, big promise for this year. There's infrastructure there. There's all sorts of reasons why people should be interested in that country. Do you think what is happening as we speak is sufficient grounds for deterrence, for caution, for a defensive attitude? How does that play out?
Yeah, this is exactly what must be worrying the technocrats in Jonathan's administration right now. They've taken a lot of trouble to try and promote an image, especially to foreign investors, of reform, an agenda for fiscal stabilization and rationalization. The subsidies were a big part of that. They wasted 25% or so of their budget last year, not in the budget, but spending overall on $8 billion to support the fuel price. That just can't make sense. So tackling it makes sense and feeds into that picture of the growing middle class. On the other hand, this kind of social instability, the overall crisis that the Boko Haram, North-South, Muslim-Christian, sectarian and ethnic conflict, that picture had been on a sort of separate track for investors. They hadn't really been noticing that because you could operate in Lagos and Abuja and not really be exposed to that. And now that world and the world for foreign investors have collided. And it's already the case that investors will be thinking twice, especially because of the location of some of the less ethnic, less sectarian aspects of the protest movement. The Southwest, where Lagos is located, most of the states in that region including Lagos State, are run by the Opposition Action Congress, which is not Jonathan's party. So
see the whole picture is the important message for investors that's unfolding. Exactly. We ought to say something before we close about the important dimension of oil, because we do seem to be on the brink of a situation where tensions might increase if, as they've promised or threatened to do, the oil workers join the national strike.
That's right. So they've threatened to join the strike from Monday next week. And if that were to happen, oil companies do have some spare capacity plans in place to keep production moving. They're used to the disruptions from unions in the oil sector. However, they can't keep the pumps going indefinitely, and that will start to dent government coffers. It could have knock-on effects for the global oil price, given that there is already the Iran situation, and if in that febrile environment investors are looking for a reason to be nervous, this would be an extra reason. So it does also affect the overall investment picture and confidence, business confidence, and will but that also, going back to the first question, increases the pressure on the Jonathan administration to reach some kind of an accommodation.
And that's what we think we see, though quite how long it'll take and what happens between now and the time it is realized are big questions, of course. We're looking at those questions. We're following this fluid and somewhat volatile situation very closely in our analysis. Do feel free to contact us if we can help you in any way in terms of understanding the dramatic developments in Nigeria this week. In the meantime, goodbye.